everyone who made it possible for me to be with you all. Um, I'm a linguist by training, as Professor Amfu said. I did my bachelor's in linguistics at the University of Ghana. And at the time, I was interested in morphology and syntax. And so I wrote a BA thesis, a BA long essay, as it's called in Ghana, on nouns and nominalization. But then, as a storyteller, I want to tell you a little bit about my own background, especially my graduate training. When I arrived in the United Kingdom, York, United Kingdom, in 1984, um, my aim was to do phonetics and phonology. I think I had done some syntax and morphology at the undergraduate level, and so I said, let me switch to phonetics and phonology. And I was very fortunate, I should say. The two people who uh, became my mentors, John Cully and John Local, uh, I called them radicals at the time because and I'll say more about them. I mean, they had kind of mostly moved away from what was the traditional approach to phonology, especially. I mean, they recognized the mess in phonological theory, and they were interested in working with data, that was real-time data, if you like, conversational data, instead of, sitting someone down and asking them to produce words and sentences. And so one of the things that was given to me, one of the books that was given to me was the book by Stephen Levinson. But before I talk about that, let me kind of give you a brief overview of what I'm going to do. First, I'll talk about my approach to theoretical linguistics, especially phonetic study. Tell you what conversational analysis is. Most of you know it already. I will try not to reinvent the wheel, so I'll be very brief on that. And then I'll talk about topical areas that are of interest to me, give you the aim of this webinar, and then how I do conversational phonetics. Then, of course, I'll talk about the data that I use, the nature and kind of it, how I analyze my data, and then I'll provide you with examples from my data over the years. Then there will be a brief conclusion, and we'll take questions. So,
Well, can
as
we
I
have
said,
it full screen? Maybe
oh,
when
okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Let's see. So view slideshow.
thank
Okay,
you.
you're welcome. Yeah, so as I said, I arrived in the UK in 1984. Um, and then one of the things that changed my perspective or my approach to the study of phonetics and phonology was a book written by Stephen Levinson called Pragmatics that was handed to me by John Cully. Now, these John Cully and John Local, my advisors, were theoretical linguists who were unapologetically conversational phoneticians and fed-in prosodic phonologists. Now, those days, I was very fortunate to meet with Gil Jefferson, who was visiting Tilburg University. I mean, she had been invited to York to give a series of lectures, and I sat in her lectures, and that also changed my perspective on how to do linguistics in general. And in 93, I was very fortunate to be given an opportunity to go to UCLA to study under the tutelage of Peter Ladefoged. Um, and I had 2 hours of meeting with Emmanuel Shagloff, who was in sociology, and he was very generous. He gave me an opportunity to record our meeting, our conversation. So I learned from him firsthand how he did conversational analysis. I had tons of questions for him. Anybody who knows me knows I like to ask questions. There were areas that we agreed, there were some areas that we did not. But in the end, I always came out, of a meeting with him. Excuse me? Oh, okay. Emmanuel Shagloff, as I said. And then there was Ras Shu, who was the Africanist linguist in the Department of Linguistics at UCLA. He was very helpful to me in terms of his approach to African linguistics. Now, here's my approach. I want to talk about my approach to theoretical linguistics, especially the study of phonetics. And one thing that is very clear to anybody who's seen my work is that I believe that the starting point of linguistic study should be spoken language. And that may sound a little unconventional or even sacrilegious to some linguists, but because, I mean, they think overindulgence in phonetic data instead of, just looking for distinctive elements of word structure, is not the thing to do. But as I said, I'm unapologetic about using detailed phonetic transcriptions for my work. Now, of course, I'm aware of the danger of extravagance, especially the lack of parsimony, a common criticism that is leveled against phoneticians by what do you call it, especially phonologists, but also by some in the social sciences. Now, there's a story told by the late Professor David Abercrombie about the marriage between phonetics and phonology. I'm not going to tell the entire story, but give you a summary of it. Phonetics was married to phonology, and phonetics, or the phonetician, was the husband. The phonologist was the wife. And the husband, they lived in a hunter-gatherer or gathering society. So the phonetician will go to the forest and hunt for game and brought everything, all manner of things that, the phonologist felt was probably not needed. But then the phonologist had brain, the phonetician probably didn't, they thought. And the phonologist will kind of sit down, sift through what the phonologist will sit down, sift through what the phonetician had brought, and then pick and choose which ones the phonologist thought was important. Basically, what David Abercrombie was referring to was the phonologist going through what the phonetician gathers, to determine, things that were distinctive in the data. I mean, of course, he was referring to phonemes and stuff like that. In the end, there was a divorce, and David Abercrombie says the divorce was bad for both the phonetician and the phonologist. Now, in England at the time, should I say United Kingdom at the time, some departments, some linguistics departments felt that phonetics that did not belong there. In fact, Leeds University, for example, had a department of phonetics. Later, it merged with linguistics and became known as Department of Phonetics and Linguistics. And in my own department at the University of York, the department used to be called Department of Language. Then it changed to Language and Linguistic Science. So you could see the tension that was there, the phonetician and the syntactician and the semanticist, the neurolinguist, they saw themselves as scientists, so to speak, natural scientists. So, I mean, when I remember a very funny thing that I saw a tension, so to speak, between two of my advisors, well, not advisors, teachers. One had written at the back of his door, words don't mean anything these days. And the other had written, words mean a lot of things these days, So obviously it was between the semanticist and the person who did pragmatics. The pragmaticist or the pragmatician, as some people, what do you call them, call such people, I mean, people who did pragmatics. However, I mean, what David Abercrombie concludes the story by saying, you know what? It shouldn't be that the phonetician and or the phonologist has two hats, one of which she wears, at a time. Both hats could be worn because phonetics and phonology, it's very difficult to separate them in the real sense of the word separation. We need phonology, and we need phonetics, and the two, share a lot of things in common. Um, you can't do phonology without phonetics. Now, and of course, we know that sometimes overindulgence can be problematic. But Abercrombie says that, and I love the statement, he says, you can't, decide, what you want until you have it all. You can't decide what you need until you have it all. And of course, there are those who will criticize him by saying, you can never have it all. Now, let me emphasize, however, that I'd rather work, with everyday noisy speech, situation than with, slow or normal data, So yes, it's kind of easier to work with, to sit someone down and ask them to produce words and sentences, or even tell a story and to record and work on this. But I believe that, the painstaking record of attention to phonetic detail provide an insight into talk and interaction and effective communication. Now, let me say something very briefly about CA. Um, and instead of reviewing the literature, I would have done in a normal lecture, I just have the names of these people and I will talk about how they have influenced my thinking. So in talking about CA, you can't forget uh, Sachs, Shagloff, and Jefferson. It's kind of painful, isn't it, that all three of them have passed on. And of course, the work of Garfinkel and Goffman. And basically, what happens in CA, that's conversational analysis, is that we examine how people engage in talk, interaction, use language. Of course, we also look at nonverbal forms of interaction, such as gestures, gaze, proximity. The work of Craig and Washington, for example, looks at children who converse, and what they found was that, gaze and proximity were very important. If one person looked at the other, the tendency was for the person being, looked at, that's where the gaze was directed, to become the next speaker. And also, the closer someone was to the other person, the more likely it was for them to become a speaker. All right. Now, and then of course, it's also important that, and I'm re-emphasizing this, studies of real-time interaction, see, that's conversational analysts, conversational analysts study real-time interaction with a view to understanding how interactional participants make sense of each other's utterances in instantaneous interactions. In other words, as each stimulus is responded to by a second or a third, what we find is that the participant orientations to what is said, helps not just the people engaged in the interaction, it also helps the analysts to make sense of what is going on. One thing that I also want to mention is that CA has its roots in ethnomethodology. In the past, the statement that was used to describe them, which I thought was pejorative, was that they were referred to as a breakaway group of sociologists. But basically, what they felt was that to understand what is going on in interaction, it is important to pay attention to what the interactional participants themselves are saying, instead of basing our analytical assertions on our intuitions or what we think people are doing. Now, CA is interdisciplinary. Sociologists do it, anthropologists, linguists, psychologists, healthcare, those in medical sciences. There's a colleague here. When I arrived in Indiana some 31 years ago, I even though I was in linguistics, I was very much interested in what was going on in sociology. And so I joined a group, and one of the people, two of them, I should say, that I learned very much from were Douglas Maynard and Alan Grimshaw. And, Douglas Maynard left IU to go and teach in the medical school at University of Wisconsin Medical School. So, it's kind of funny because we all go to our physicians, our doctors, and when you ask them, did you take any lesson or class in how to communicate with your patients? What they will tell us, probably they did maybe 1 hour or two. However, as we all know, knowing how to talk is very important, knowing how to communicate. Let me tell you a very funny story. About 11 years ago, I was diagnosed with multiple myeloma, a form of cancer, blood cancer. And, it's kind of funny. The physician came to me and said, Samuel, you have cancer. And I looked at him and I said, do you have a brain? You know me, that's how I talk. And he said, why? I said, you don't tell me I have that. Find a way to say it so that I don't panic. but, he'd not been trained in how to communicate bad news. So, I mean, a branch of the studies I do is to how to manage bad news. How do you manage it? Say that your story becomes tellable, but then also listenable. Uh, and I was glad that, in at least at Wisconsin, they teach about the medical communication in education, in law, and in media studies. For the past 5 years, I've been involved with a colleague, Akuya Campbell at the University of Ghana. We've been working on legal language, legal discourse. In Ghana, I mean, Ghana has two forms of what do you call it, law, or should I say legal systems. We have our traditional legal systems, which I love. You have a committee of elders that settle disputes and stuff like that. And then there's the Western-based one, which is based on English common law. And it's kind of, I mean, most of my studies in the past, were based on our traditional legal system. But for the past 5 years, I've been working with Professor Okuya Campbell. We've been working on Guinean district courts, and it's kind of interesting how, especially the use of translators in said court can, what do you call it, sometimes twist and turn what goes on in the courtroom. Um, all right, so let me talk about people whose work have influenced me the most. Of course, I have John Kelly and John Local. When I arrived in England, these guys were doing what at the time was called conversational phonetics. And I asked myself, what is it? As I said before, they'd kind of been disappointed by the extent to which linguists, were discounting the details in everyday talk or everyday speech, even though, as we all know, such details are very important in helping us to understand language. I mean, these people have influenced me. In fact, by the time I started my dissertation, nothing had been done on conversational phonetics in an African language. And so I said, well, why don't I do it? And they were very enthusiastic about it, and they helped me considerably. Stephen Levinson, of course, his book, Pragmatics, especially when I read the third chapter and the sixth chapter, it also changed my perspective, especially, where they talk about the difference between CA and DA, conversation analysis and discourse analysis. CA is mostly inductive, whereas DA is deductive, which is like what happens in mainstream linguistics, where you look at rules of well-formedness and determine, what is and what isn't grammatical and stuff like that. And then, of course, Gil Jefferson has influenced me. I mean, Jefferson, Sachs, and Shugloff, anyone who's done CA would have read their 1974 classic, simpler systematics, where they talk about turn taking and how in a token interaction, one person starts talking, stops talking, the other person comes in, and that transition occurs at a TRP, transition relevance place. Sometimes things don't go the way they should. Somebody may come in when the current speaker has not done speaking, in which case an overlap ensues, and there are ways to solve the overlap. Later studies also show that in societies that are called high involvement societies, there's a possibility of two or more people talking at the same time. I'm sure you may have seen this on television many, many years ago when we had Isaac Rabin, Yasser Arafat, and Larry King, Larry King on CNN talking, and how, they talked over each other. And of course, they are from high involvement style, what they call speech communities. And it's not a problem. I mean, quite a number of West African societies, belong to the high involvement style of talking, where you can have more than one person talking, and it's not a problem. They can, solve issues that are overlaps, and the overlaps are not seen as turn competitive. So coming back to Sachs, Shugloff, and Jefferson, their work on repair, issues that relate to non-hearing, mishearing, misunderstanding. I like Du Bois work on correction proper also. So these people, I mean, Elizabeth Cooper Cullen, who was at Constance University in Germany, was one of the very few people who was working on English conversational phonetics. And the book that she edited with Margaret Selton, in 1986, I believe it was, also influenced me considerably. They looked at pitch, loudness, tempo. Local Kelly looked at pitch, loudness, tempo, rhythm. And then, of course, for those in the English system, especially London and York, J.R. Firth, his work, Sounds and Prosodies, also impacted me considerably. Firth had been disappointed, so to speak, in the use of the word phoneme, because phoneticists themselves had problems with it. The Trubetskians believe in the phoneme as an abstract entity. The mentalists, Chomsky, Noam Chomsky, based on his teacher, had been influenced by, or they influenced others on the mentalist view of the phoneme, say that the phoneme is a mental entity and that, it is Israelization is the phonic element. And of course, there were the Bloomfidians and Daniel Jones in England at the time who saw the phoneme as a physical entity, so the physical view of the phoneme. So what J.R. Firth said was that, what, the phoneticists themselves appear to be saying, your phonemes are dead, long live my phoneme. So what is it? And to add my own bit to it, none of my parents went to school. My father was a blacksmith. This is a profession you don't see anymore. And anytime we went to his store or his shop or his workplace, he would tell us, don't touch anything. Always, make sure, put your palm close to it. And if it is not hot, then you can touch it. Basically, what he was teaching us at the time was, don't work with a tool for which you are not familiar with. So Fred, looked at phonology from a different perspective. He saw what do you call it, any phonetic data as being, sounds and prosodies. And in his analysis, he had phonematic units and prosodic units. Phonematic units, he called them, those are the, if you like, the ghost. And then the prosodies, so you have syntagmatic or paradigmatic and syntagmatic. So, for example, could you imagine someone producing the word yes as yes, yes, that would be very funny. When you add the spirit to it, when you add a prosody to it, then you can say, it can be pronounced in different ways. You can say yes, yes, yes. So what Fred basically was saying is that it's only when you add what he called the spirit or the prosodies to the phonematic units, which are unpronounceable, that you can actually get speech to understand what's going on. The work of Paul Drill, John Heritage, Harold Garfinkel, and Evan Goffman, also impacted me considerably. You can't, basically what these guys were saying was that you can't look at language material, without looking at the micro and the macro aspect of it. These impacted SSNJ, SAS, Shigloff, and Jefferson also. And of course, Deborah Schifrin. And there's one person I've put here, Norman Feklo, who looked at language from the point of view of, language and power, looked at linguistic material from the point of view of language and power. Now, that may sound like contradicting or even opposing what CA practitioners were doing. And sometimes I've said in some of my writings that I'd rather have both, Norman Feklo and then SSNJ and the others, if that will help me explain things the way I think is more appropriate. So yes, I'm unapologetically a conversational phonetician. I like CA. These days, I also do DA, discourse analysis, as practiced by Toyin Van Dyke. I know Toyin very well, and I like his work. And what do you call it? So topical area that I've studied ordinary conversations. When I started studying ordinary conversation, let me tell you how I got to this. A senior colleague of mine, some of you may know him, Kwesi Yanka, was in graduate school here in Indiana. in the early 80s and early to mid 80s. And he had made me his research assistant. So I was recording data for him. He was interested in um, what do you call it, language of the royal, what do you call it, domain, royal oratory, so to speak. In particular, he was interested in Proverbs. So I went around, sat in the courts of the elders, and I was very fortunate. My dad was also an elder, and so I sat in his court also, and they recorded considerable conversation. And I also recorded ordinary conversations. As I was doing it, I said, well, why don't I record ordinary conversations? Now, there was something that those days you could do, which you cannot do now. You recorded without telling the people you were recording. Then after you had recorded it, you would tell them, okay, I've recorded you. And the word that they used was, you have stolen us. In other words, you have stolen our conversation. And then you negotiated, rules of negotiation, which in this culture, in American culture, we say you were bribing them, but you are not bribing them in their kind of culture. You were compensating them for recording them without telling them first. So, of course, these days you have to get human subject permission and all that. So some of the conversations I recorded in the early 80s, wouldn't qualify to be used as data for what's happening now. Now, now specific topical areas, that I've worked on 10 taking, overlapping talk. I will share some of this with you. 10 competitive and non-competitive interruptions, repair, adjacency pairs, and many others. And then there are other areas like, cross-examination, very interesting area to work in the legal system, especially both in the traditional legal system and in the modern, or should I say, Western-based legal system. Issues of apologizing, where in what do you call the society that I study, sometimes you don't have to apologize, because if you do, then you're telling them you're not part of the community. How the various strategies that we use in apologizing, and if you've listened to West African English, for example, some people can say I'm sorry, but that doesn't mean they are culpable. So culpability, apologizing has nothing to do with culpability. It sometimes means you are empathizing with a friend, with a person. Let me tell you a story that happened when I was visiting UCLA. Peter, I'd forget, had his cup of tea, and he poured it. And I said, oh dear, sorry. And he said, Sam, you didn't pour it. And of course, he'd lived in Ghana and Nigeria forever. And so after seeing that, he began to laugh and said, of course, I know you speak in West African English, and that you are not responsible for it, and that you are empathizing with me. I've also done with issues of requesting, where again in Akan culture, and this is very funny, if I go to the village, sometimes someone tells me, your shirt is so nice, or your shoes are lovely. In fact, they are not complimenting me, they are requesting it. So yes, there are instances where people do direct requests, but most requests are done indirectly. And the reason they do that is that an offer is preferable to being rejected or being refused. So they will speak in such a way that they're not direct, which in this society will be seen as being insincere. But in the cultures that I study, indirectness is an acceptable mode of I've also studied bad news delivery. I've recorded quite a bit of and one of the things that I'm not going to present some of that here, but one of the things that I found in delivering of bad news is the preponderance of pauses. People will pause for sometimes 4 seconds, which is too much. Jefferson, in her study of English conversations, saw that the normal pausing rate was what you call 0.5 seconds. Now, so if in the culture that I'm studying, the normal is between 0.5 and 1. But when someone pauses for 4 minutes, no, did I say 4 minutes? 4 seconds. That's very long. That's a very long pause in an interaction. That is very common when people are delivering bad news. And then, of course, I've studied insulting, moral ordering in the courtroom, and this is very interesting because here, the interpreters, sometimes appropriate or take the order, the power of the court and scold the disputants. Let me put it that way, and it's kind of interesting how through language they kind of telling people you can't say this, or you have to shut up and stuff like that. And then, of course, one area that I've kind of is a tricky area, because sometimes I ask, am I qualified to even work on this? But one area that I've looked at is, conceptualization of ideas, the concept of ideas, and how how the concept of idea is made manifest in account courtrooms. What is considered idea? Is it thought? Does it translate as thought, mind, integrity, or what is it? And it's an area that I've been working on now. So in this lecture, my aim, in this webinar, my aim is to demonstrate that the phonetic aspect of language must be understood first and foremost as shaped by interactional considerations, and that an understanding of the function of phonetic detail requires an understanding of the interactional context in which interactants operate, and the interactional functions of those phonetic resources. So we're looking at the phonetic resources that are available to interactional participants, and how these require an understanding of the context of where the discourse is taking place. And a principle that I put forward here is that phonetic exponency must derive from sequential action based on analysis of talk and interaction. If we're going to the various exponents of what is said, whether it is breathy phonation, creaky phonation, fast tempo, slow tempo, stuff like that. This must all this derive from the sequential action, of the analysis of the talk and interaction. Now, the nature of data that I use, as I've said it a million times, is naturally occurring real-time interactions. These are neither invented nor simulations. I'm also particular about native speaker statusship. If I'm studying Akan people, I want to make sure that the people I'm recording are native speakers of Akan. Now, if I were doing, other things, if I were looking at things that could involve native speakers and non-native speakers, I would do it. But if I'm studying, for example, apologies in Akan, I want to make sure that the people I'm studying, or the records, the recordings I'm doing, are those of native speakers. And what I do in collecting the data is, I collect audio recorded. That's what I mostly do. And if I'm allowed to, sometimes I do video recordings of natural occurring interactions. My transcriptions, I first do a conventional orthography and impressionistic. Now, I know, for example, that Gail Jefferson, became very famous with the form of orthography that she developed. What I haven't done is to follow that. I've used standard Akan orthography first, and then I've done impressionistic transcription, where I show considerable phonetic details. So what I'm saying here is that the impressionistic phonetic records are taken exactly as they stand from my own notebook or my own computer. These are not invented, as I've said, or simulations. Now, because I do impressionistic phonetics, what I do is to ask colleagues to also listen to and go over my transcriptions. And this is a technique I learned in England. You think you might hear well, and especially since I've grown older, sometimes you hear it may not be the best. So I always do this. I mean, I ask colleagues or graduate students of mine to also look at the data. And I do instrumental work also. I do this sparingly. I would ask, what do you call it, sometimes my graduate students to, check especially the F0. If I'm interested in pitch stuff, for example, we look at the F0 of what's going on. We look at tempo and rhythm. And the way I look at rhythm, I think we're familiar with the studies on rhythm where they talk about periodicity and isochrony. In 1987 and later in 88, I did a paper, and I'll share some of that with you, where I saw Akan as using what I call then tick timing. Basically, it's like syllable timing, but then because I'm interested in tempo and rhythm, what I found was that sometimes the beats I had half beats, quarter beats, or notes, if you like, and what do you call it? I had to kind of indicate all those. I give absolute explicit recognition to isolated utterance. So especially they are syntagmatic, syntagmatic, horizontal, paradigmatic, vertical. And the reason I use natural occurring conversation is that there are no artificialities, and also participants can be heard reasonably well. Now, CA, as I've mentioned, is inductive, as opposed to what we do in physical linguistics, deductive. Most of my work has been qualitative in nature. What I've seen of late, however, is that if you do purely qualitative data, it's difficult to get published. Uh, and so, my advice, what I advise graduate students to do is, to also do quantitative, to use quantitative methodology to support their qualitative data or the obverse. In other words, I encourage them to do mixed methods. All my analytical assertions, claims, and commentaries, are not based on wishful thinking, or what I hear or wish to hear. They're based on materials that I have observed and recorded, and or by my research co-participants. And this enables me to posit how phonetic detail and phonetic variability are used by interactants to achieve their various tasks. Now, I treat all phonetic resources equally by not giving functional primacy to any of them. However, sometimes I can talk about just pitch, I can talk about just loudness, but then I've looked at the entire data, and I may, for example, do a paper in which I looked at just pitch and loudness. In fact, in a 1992 paper that I did for York Papers and Linguistics, I was in Ghana at the time. I just limited it to pitch and loudness. And then in an 89 paper, I focused just on tempo and rhythm. And it's kind of funny because, all they intertwine. So, in the real world, you have to look at all these, but you can't look at everything. That's also something that we all know. So I describe how participants' interactional actions correlate with the phonetic features, and I subsequently present a detailed phonetic description of the interactional actions. I refrain from making interlanguage generalizations, and when necessary, pair phonetic and morphosyntactic and sometimes semantic features. Now, each interactive category, such as if it is turn initiation, turn closing, or whatever, repair initiation, repair performance, and stuff like that, is analyzed in its own terms on empirical and is based on empirical evidence without any prejudice, to any. I treat all phonetic resources equally. I think I've said this already. I describe how participants' interactions correlate with phonetic features. I subsequently present a detailed phonetic description of such interactions. I refrain from making, I think I've said this already, I'm repeating myself, aren't I? Now, whenever I propose functional categories in my analysis, these are warranted, from or by extras from my data, from my empirical data. I don't just say this happens. I have to support my assertions with actual extracts that are drawn from the data. And whenever examples are given in support of an argument, such examples are extracts taken from my entire data. So any generalities or generalizations made refer to the entire corpus. Now, analytical claims are based on participants. I think I've said this already. Participants' orientations to each other's stimulus, because as you know, a stimulus as a deployment is responded to with a stimulus, as deployment is the same as stimulus. If as they are responded to by speaker others' orientations, but be the second or third, we can find the conventional participants, making sense of what the person is doing. And as I said before, this helps the analyst also. Now, I don't know how well you can see this. Can you see this? Are they big enough? Okay. People are quiet. Whoops.
Not bad.
Yeah, you can see it.
So these are some of the phonetic, the transcription key, a swell is a sudden increase and decrease in loudness. There's forte, if you've done basic music, you know about these, fortissimo, piano. So I'm looking at loudness here, pianissimo, norm loudness. Now, when you have this, you're looking at increasing loudness, decreasing loudness. Now, this is very important here, the glottal hold. The reason I'm saying it's important is that you find it in 10 competitive interactions where, someone deploys a glottal hold and the other person stops. And the person who deployed the glottal hold, gains the 10 occupancy. Of course, we also know that using forte, loudness, also what do you call it, helps to hold the 10. In fact, Levinson calls it upgrading. So upgrading, may be done with increasing loudness, fast tempo, glottal hold, acel, rallentando. And then I use this notation to indicate falling in the pitch up to the speaker's pitch ring. Now, where I have two semicolons, what you find is that in theoretical linguistics, you can use more than two. Sometimes I use more than two to indicate extra long. This one is used to show the duration of pauses. When I began working on this, we used a stopwatch. I still use my stopwatch, but I also use what Audacity and IPrA gave me. Now, here I show cricophonation. Cricophonation, for those who are not familiar with this, is it's like the voice that is used by ventriloquists. It's like lifting a heavy load and talking at the same time. So if I do something like, this is very heavy, as opposed to breath phonation, this is very heavy. So, all right. And then, of course, we can have breathy that is aspirated. All right. And then when overlap occurs in a large position, in other words, as soon as the current speaker speaks, the next speaker comes in. So the next speaker's utterance is latched onto the current speaker's utterance. We use an equal to sign. Okay. Oh dear, this is not moving. So okay, let me use this one. There you go. Also, we have the musical notation. When I'm dealing with rhythm, especially in tempo, I use musical notations. And if you're familiar with this, so that's the full note. This is the minim is the half note, the crotchet, the what do you call it, the quaver, and then you can have what do you call it, two ape notes that are joined together. This is the half rest, that's a pause, silence, and then that's the full rest. Now, one thing that you find in conversations in general, is that in some cases you can actually perceive or hear inhalation and what exhalation, people taking in air and pushing out air to signal that either they're done or whatever have you. So I use this, and I must say that I use this musical notation sparingly. Quite recently, I did some work with a colleague, a junior colleague at the University of Ghana, Setofori, and we worked on glossolalia. For those of you who are not familiar with it, there's what do you call it, a xenoglossia and glossolalia. Xenoglossia is when you speak a language you have not studied, and glossolalia is when you use a static speech. Those of you who are familiar with Christian literature, on the day of Pentecost, the gentlemen, the apostles that were gathered, they began to speak in languages they have not studied. And there were people around who said, oh, these guys must be drunk. And Peter stood up and defended the action, said, oh, no, we are not drunk. We are fulfilling the prophecy of Joel. So basically, they were speaking in languages they hadn't studied. There were people from Iraq, Iran, Persia, Pamphylia, people from Syrian, Egypt, Libya, who heard them speaking in their own languages. And then there is the static speech, which, according to William Summerin, his paper that he did in 1972, he talks about it not being human language, and it's been supported by, what do you call it, neuroscientists at the University of Pennsylvania. It can, because in a static speech, what is coming out is not from the brain center. The brain center, that's the frontal lobe designated for language, is coming from the social part of the brain. But what's important, the reason I'm mentioning this is that, quite recently we use these musical notations to deal with glossolalia speech. Now let me give examples. We look at examples of turn taking, overlapping, talk, repair, and others. What I will try to do is go over this carefully if I can. Let me see if I can make this bigger. Is it big enough? Okay.
Yes.
So here, what we see is that, this person begins nti ɛsɛ sɛ otua yɛn ka wo efa ɛsɛ sɛ aban tua yɛn ka, so you have this what do you call it, half note. So he's going, then he slows down, rest, all right, and then the other person also comes in. The dot means the note plus half of that. So okay, na se oguso, okay, pa 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 pa. Okay, and then this guy comes in, so here you have two eighth notes, so with the sasanka, yeah, bopa, as for you, we ought to beat you up. So let me give the context here. This was recorded in my hometown, by the way. Government had taken our land, as they do. In fact, quite recently, they took our land again for an oil palm project. And the people were not consulted. And compensation wasn't coming. We knew government was making money, but not paying us anything. So the lands commissioner who was sent to the place, was confronted by the people, he said, the government is paying you. And this guy said, oh, we have to beat you up, So as for you, we ought to beat you up. And what he's doing here is that he begins with allegro, so there's allegro, tempo, and then there's lento. So, see. And what is interesting here is what we see here is that, if you look at the 10 ending here, there's lento, the entire thing is lento, but, so this person slows down throughout, and stops speaking. The next person comes in, stops speaking, and then this other person comes in again. He begins very fast, but then also slows down, So what we see here is that, especially here, he's telling us, I'm done talking. He begins very fast, and then as he's ending, you can see that the notes are longer than when it was begun. Here is one that looks, let me see if I can make this bigger. Oh dear, let's see. Okay, is this big enough? Can we all see?
Yes.
Okay, so here, it's a very interesting case. So these are recorded in the court, traditional court. And here we're looking at what do you call it, overlap here. This guy begins yadase. Okay. Now normally you say yadase, which means we thank you, but he says yadase. Now this person treats the as the next person treats the as okay. this person is not sure of our royal status. So he says, Obru, this is how you should respond. So you should be, and then here he comes in again, Yadasi Obru, we thank you, your royal highness. And what we're seeing here is that the overlap occurs in a latched position. As soon as the pitch falls to the bottom of the speaker's pitch range, okay, this person comes in to provide the word that was being searched for. And then, I mean, he also, as you can tell, the pitch is very, very low here. All right, so let me go on to the next one. Now here we have, let me see if I can make this bigger. Here we see upgrading, okay? So here it's kind of interesting. These are two university students who are talking about the existence of God. So this person, Obianim. Now, Obianim, okay? So the pitch falls, and as soon as the pitch falls, this guy begins in. Okay, this guy interrupts him. So this sign is for overlap initiation, and that one is for overlap ending. So this guy comes in. Okay, so this guy comes in, and what we see is 10 competition here. This guy's pitch is high. We have what do you call it? Forte. Okay, there is increasing loudness, and then there is a swell, a sudden increase and decrease in loudness here. So as soon as the pitch rises, okay, and you no akwada. Okay, nobody teaches the child that God exists. It's a very common Akan idiom that is used. Everyone is aware of God's existence, so you don't teach a child that God is there. There is God. Now, so what we see here is that, yes, this guy begins with norm, okay, and then what happens? He slows down. There's pianissimo, there's a gradual decrease in loudness, and there's pianissimo here. And so what is interesting here is that the upgrading is done with what do you call it, raised pitch height and forte and even fortissimo loudness. And this guy stops talking, and this guy finishes what he was saying. So what I'm saying here is that the international participants, interpret rising pitch and volume, as 10 holding device. And the person that interrupts, comes in and then stops talking. What we identify with his talk is that there's a decrease in loudness, and what do you call it? He gives up the turn, and the other person continues with it. And here's another one. Again, let me try and make it big. This one, Kofi by Kwesidi Wama. I've used a form of orthography here. Okay, Kofi came. And look at this. Kofi by, it falls to the bottom of his speech range. And then the next speaker treats that as a possible turn ending, a TRP, transition relevance place. So he comes in, the pausing is 0.5, which is normal. But again, what we see here is that, he says, oh, okay, all right. And then this guy continues with forte, and it's kind of very fun. It's very close here. Forte, piano, and then pianissimo. Now, look at what is happening here. The use of breathy phonation. Kwesi dear, wama. Kwesi dear, wama. Okay. And then as soon as we see the what do you call, look at this one. This one is high tone. We know this, don't we? There's a difference between pitch and tone. Pitch is the if you like, the phonetic realization of tone, which is phonological. And I mean, I'm not gonna tell you what you already know. I mean, so here what we find is that even the high tone is realized on a very low pitch relatively. And as soon as this guy gets here, look at the latching. This person comes in again. And that's the problem. This guy came, that one didn't. That's the problem. Here is another one. Now here they're doing repair. And as I said before, repair is a technique that is used in to resolve mishearing, non-hearing, misunderstanding. In fact, some have extended repair, to include spoonerisms. You know what spoonerisms are? Professor Spooner, who taught at Oxford, and it's kind of funny because it is, and I don't know how far true this is. He studied spoonerisms, and he became, afflicted with it, and so it was named after him. This is where, for example, instead of saying Chomsky, Noam Chomsky, Chomsky and Hale, people would say Chomsky and Charlie. So it's a kind of thing that happens, and with various forms of repair, sometimes it's non-hearing. Now, repair, as we know, can be self-initiated, self-repair. The speaker of the repairable, okay, initiates the repair and does the repair. So self-initiated, some self-repair. There are cases where you have self-initiated other repair. So the person who makes or produces the repairable initiates it, but then someone else does the repair. And then we have other initiated other repair, other initiated self-repair. And in our study of what do you call it, a juridical discourse, we saw very interesting cases where, you have other initiated other repair, and what do you call it, other initiated self-repair, and then other comes in again to affirm the repair. Very interesting in judicial discourse. But all right, so here we look at this person says, world project. He realizes that, world is not what he was looking for. So he says, idea, this thing. And then he says, Quai project. Quai project. So the parable is world or word. Word, okay, word. It's a borrowing, obviously, for world. He said, world. And then Quai is what he was looking for. And then here, this guy comes in, Quai project. So he kind of, it's like accepting what the correction, Quai project. Here is an initiated self-repair. So here's a repairable. I mean, this is very neat, Let me make it a little bigger if I can. Is this better or should I make it bigger? Whoops. It won't let me with it. Let's see if I can make it bigger. Can you see this well enough?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So here, again, this is back to the conversation that involved the government stealing our land. He says, Ankawomba, Ankawuko, you would have left. Ankawuko, Ankawama, Okay, you would have left. You have asked your wife to go ahead of you, and then you go. You have left this town. Remember, he said we would have beaten you up. So he ends in a what you call a falling pitch movement that falls to the bottom of his pitch range. Okay, now this guy comes in, Ankameya then is like non-hearing. What would I have done? Ankameya then he says, "Me say, I'm saying that Ankawa Mawida Dikan da." So what we find here is if you look at the use of what do you call it, breathy phonation, the low tones, which is realized as a falling pitch movement in the phonetics. Here he's talking about Yuri, and you have high rise in here. And then this guy says, having wronged you guys, and of course here to what we see is the fall of pitch to the bottom of his pitch range. And but what is interesting is that here the repairable is in Kameya then what would I have done? Okay, and if you look at the way it is done, the pitch is, in fact, there's a rising pitch that goes on here, and this guy comes in, may say, I'm telling you, or I say, and then eventually, what is interesting here is that the repairable, the repair initiation may be done with, in this particular case, is done with what? High pitch height, and even a rising pitch here, although I haven't marked the pitch as rising pitch height. And then the correction, what do you call it? When he gives what do you call it? The repaired, he says, "Anka mese anka what my ready can da." Okay, so again, he starts, and then he's not in a hurry. But then when he gets to Uri again, there's the rising page, and then he falls to the bottom of his preaching. And then this guy says, "But I haven't done anything wrong." And then this guy comes in again. This guy saying, I have not done any wrong. Okay. Now, this guy saying, listen to what he's saying. So here, what you see is that as the other speaker comes, and this has nothing to do with repair, okay? In this particular one here, what he's saying, you guys you're not taking us seriously. What I'm saying is that, you shouldn't be talking that way. You shouldn't be speaking the way you're speaking. Most importantly, repair initiation, the actual repair itself. Now here, again, you have a repair initiation. So, into Sikano de Abandiaba, is it big enough? Can you guys see, or should I make it bigger? Let me make it a little bigger, maybe. Let's see. Into Sikano de Abandiaba. So, as for the money, the government has brought it. And then this guy comes in, oh, Sikano de Sakwe, oh, Sakwe, Usujeni. So he's trying to remember. It's like he's groping for a word. And this guy says, Achampong. Okay, so he provides the repaired. And then this guy continues, Achampong Bresson, buy and with Sikano. So the money was brought during the Champion's time, and he squandered the money. He's eating the money, talking about corruption. Most importantly, this guy, is groping for a name, and this guy provides the name. Now, this is the religious discourse I was talking about. Let me make it big so that we can see at least this. Normally in religious discourse, if it is sermonic, it's like a monologue. If it's a prayer, it could be unitary or what do you call one person doing it. But in this particular case, what we found, was that this person does it, the other person comes in. And what is interesting is the use of pitch and loudness here. And rhythm. I mean, piece of rhythm, basically, this one comes in, yay. So it's like the initiation. And then this guy does shinko lababa, shinko labalabali. Okay, so now again, let me kind of say something about this. What William Summerin and also David Crystal observed is that with glossolalia or with a static speech, what we find is that the glossolalia is based on the glossolalis, what you call our native language. So the syllable structure is based on it. Pitch pattern or tone is based on it. And so the people we studied, are can speakers, and doing this glossolalia. So we have Shinko Bale. Okay, so we have okay, and here we have increasing what do you call it, loudness, and a decreasing loudness. So there's a chel tempo and then rallentando tempo. And what do we see? As soon as the pitch falls to the bottom of this guy's this A pitch range, B comes in, rinki yarama, yinki yarama. So this guy goes shinko la valley, and then this guy also comes in. And what is interesting, the reason why we're saying this is, based on a can is that the syllable structure, you have CV, CV, CV for the most part, consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel. And these co-occur with, either high pitch, but then most importantly, when the pitch falls to the bottom of the speaker's pitch range, that a person comes in. And it's kind of very consistent throughout what you call the glossolalic discourse. Now, let me kind of conclude by looking at legal discourse. Here, I'm not looking at any pitch features here, but just, well, I shouldn't say I'm not looking at pitch. I'm only looking at loudness. So the judge, the context is, a judge selects a lawyer via a question, so he selects the next speaker with a question, and the lawyer takes up the offer. So the judge speaks the lawyer. And what we found here, the judge says, Chief, are we done? So, Chief, there's a pause. Oh, yeah. Okay, so this person stops talking. Oops, I'm sorry. And then at the same context, the judge again comes in. I hope this one too, you are finishing today. Oh, yeah. Yes, I'll finish. So what is interesting here is current speaker selects, next speaker takes up the floor. And, very interesting. I mean, what we haven't done, what my colleague and I haven't done is to look at the phonetic detail, which we hope to do. So it's something that is on our to-do list. But what I just wanted to show here is that, if you look at legal discourse, it's not very different from ordinary conversation. The only difference, though, is that the quantitative speech dominance, for example, is done by the legal professionals, and also turn taking is regulated by the legal professionals, such that if a disputant, comes in when they've not been asked to, they are scolded by the interpreter. And it's kind of funny, it's not the bailiff, it's not the judge, but it's the interpreter who kind of stops the person from talking. So we've labeled that the moral ordering. The interpreters assume the position of controlling the disputants. So my lord, he was about to work on that very step from the dining hall to the garage. Who? So the interpreter says, he was, and then the judge says, who? And then he says, the plaintiff. The plaintiff wanted to work on that step. That's the staircase he meant. So here, what the judge was looking out for was who, the plaintiff, and that was enough. So he assumed that the interpreter was done, but he wasn't. So, it's kind of interesting. As soon as this is why I'm saying, for example, that sometimes content is very important also. As soon as the defendant's lawyer, would ask the question, and the interpreter provided what was being asked about, the judge came in, and this person wasn't done. All right. So, here are a few things that I want to conclude with, and I want to reemphasize the fact that phonetic features and phonetic variation have functional relevance for interactional participants. What do I mean by that? Interactional participants deploy and orient to each other's utterances, and that they pay attention to the phonetic features. Now, this does not suggest that they don't pay attention to the content. They do pay attention to the content also. But what is interesting is that, there may be an interruption, at a place where one doesn't expect it, and those interruptions come when we have, what do you call it, the current speaker's speech associated with, phonetic features that the next speaker associates with tongue delimitation. And in overlap, for example, the one who upgrades wins the floor, which also tells us that their content is important, but then the phonetic features are equally and sometimes even more important. Now, my analysis, was based solely on materials I observed and recorded myself or by my co-research participants. And the phonetic features that we saw were deployed to signal functional categories. The phonetic features were used to signal functional categories. They were used to signal either turn initiation, turn termination, in the case of overlap, to signal that I'm still on the floor, don't interrupt me. And in repair, what we saw was, when a repairable was issued, there were certain features associated with it. And then repair initiation, especially, co-occurred with increased pitch height and high volume. And when it was done, it signaled to the other participant. If it was self-repair, the person comes in and does it himself. If it was other repair, the other person came in and did the repair. My analytical claims were based solely on participants' deployment and orientations, and I hope to have been able to convince you, maybe not, that phonetic aspect of language must be understood first and foremost as shaped by interactional considerations. Painstaking record and attention to phonetic detail. So I'm repeating what I said at the beginning, provide an insight into talking interaction and effective communication. And that conversational phonetics, the conversational phonetics approach, employed in this study, in studying ordinary account conversations, I think should be extended to other, what do you call it, institutional settings. Yes, I've done some work on religious and political, but I think I need to do more. I didn't show, for example, any political discourses here, even though I've written considerably about it because I haven't looked at the phonetics of it. I'm done, I believe. Yes. So I'll take questions.
Thank you very much, Samuel Obeng, for this very detailed and insightful lecture. And there are two questions in the chat already for you. Can I read them?
Yes, please.
The first one is, thanks for your presentation so far. I would like to find out the specific transcription software you use and the measures you take to guarantee the authenticity of the transcripts and the bias elimination.
Thank you so much. Remember, I began by saying I do impressionistic phonetic recording, and the software to confirm we use Audacity. I know there are other softwares that are used, but we use Audacity. For example, when we have TRPs, for example, transition relevance plays, what we saw was that it was marked by either between 90 and 95 hertz. I don't have some to show you here. But then also I want to kind of emphasize that oftentimes, especially these days, we kind of attracted to doing instrumental phonetics, which is fine. I agree to that. It helps to confirm what the ear can hear. But I'm unapologetically, I'm an impressionistic phonetician. I believe the ear, is the best tool as far as I'm concerned. And I know, remember I said that with age, I'm going to be 66 next month. With age, my hearing will not be as good as it was when I was in my 20s, when I finished my doctorate. And so what I do is, in fact, I actually got, and this is a very good question, I got 3 of my students to work on conversational phonetics, and all 3 used instrumental phonetics. They use various softwares to do it. So I'm not against the use of software, but I'm unapologetically impressionistic phonetician. So I don't think I've satisfied you very much. But what I'm saying is that, yes, when need be, we use Pratt, or Audacity to confirm what we hear or what we think we have heard.
Thank you. And the question was by Hioma Juliet Ikechukwu Ibe, and she has, or I think she, or maybe he, has put another question in there. How has context, formal or informal, influenced your data collection and analysis, particularly regarding pitch realizations? Are there implications for the results so far?
Thank you. It's a very good question. Context in its traditional science of CA, context was devoted to the what do you call it? What speakers said and the responses to them. But remember, I said I've also been impacted by the work of Norman Fairclough. But when I began doing conversational analysis, it was just, what Sachs, Shigloff, and Jefferson and all these other people did. In fact, I was heavily influenced by Gil Jefferson when she visited York in 1984. That was when I entered graduate school, and I was fascinated by, her emphasis on the micro, so looking at the data, by looking at what is deployed and what it's oriented to. But then also, I also began to look at the broader context. And remember, I said that sometimes the two are in conflict, So if you look at those who work on language and power, they emphasize the broader, what do you call it, international context. Issues of power, for example, become very important because if it is in a court of law, even loudness has to be managed. Because if you raise your voice in a non-technical sense, in other words, if you increase your volume, it may be interpreted as you being irrational. Oh, and let me give an example. In the traditional courts that I studied, for example, the women won most of the cases. Why? Because they used pitch that was relatively low and used piano volume. And the men were seen as using loudness, so the volume was forte, and the pitch was relatively high. And the courts always interpreted that to mean that the men were arrogant. And so they lost. And it was kind of funny because they never learned. Now in these court cases, there are sub-issues that are settled, which means that, for example, if your volume was overly high, that's the loudness, they will tell you are being disrespectful. So tune down the volume. And the men will go back and, still increase the volume, and they'll fine them. And the fines, this is kind of funny, but that's what was done. The fine could be eggs, you may be fined maybe a dozen eggs, so you have to get them, or chicken, yeah, they say chicken in the US, a rooster, or if you persisted in being disrespectful based on your loudness and pitch height, you were fined maybe a goat. So yes, it's a very good question. I mean, in ordinary conversations, sometimes you can hear someone saying, "Don't yell at me. You are yelling too much. Can you bring it down?" And then they'll try to bring it down, then it goes up again. So yes, pitch and loudness, informed, how the interaction proceeded. And in overlap, as I said, in overlap resolution, if you interrupted in a way that they thought was rude, then you have to lower your volume and the pitch. Sometimes they may tell you you're speaking too fast. I speak very fast. And so when I sit in these courts, I'm like, if I were the defendant, I would have lost my case because I'll be deemed as not being properly socialized. And that's very important. So issues of power, come into play based on the conversational interaction. And I also mentioned therapeutic discourse, and especially the management of bad news. When people were talking about someone who had cancer, and one of them said, and her skin has turned coal black. And then I said, so what's going on? And it's like we're done with the conversation, but we were not, And then, so when the sick person herself was talking, and I'm sure maybe you guys don't know this, every culture attributes a sickness to the other one, to the other culture. I remember, for example, when HIV came, in my village, they would say the disease of the white people, because you won't say it's our disease. You always say it belongs to the other person. We also find the same thing happening in what do you call code switching. People feel more comfortable code switching to a foreign language if they're going to do something that is bad or difficult to say. An FTA, face-threatening act. And in this particular case, in the case of the cancer, this person is saying, well, they say it's the disease from the other part. You know, they never mention disease from the other. And the way she says it is the volume is so low that you could barely hear her, you know. And then the other person asks, so are you getting help? Then there's a long pause. And then the person says, well, it's okay. And when someone says, well, it's okay, it means it's not okay, you know. So, I mean, again, I'm going back to the fact that this is a very important question. And it's not just pitch and loudness. Issues of pausology is very important. You know, sometimes the pause is so long that you know that the person is either, if it were a normal conversation, it means they are done, but then they're waiting for you to come. What McLaughlin calls initiative time latency pause. So they pause, they expect you to come in, and you are not coming in, and so they continue. You know, so pausing is also very important, depending on in the court of law, if you pause for too long, you know, they interpret it as lying. You know, you're lying, you're not talking because, you know, what you're saying is false. You know, so these phonetic features, you know, have different functional relevance in different interactional situations. It's a very good question.
Thank you. Is your question answered by that?
Yes, yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And please, did you consider the mood? There's
Okay.
another question. I think it's not quite complete. Please, did you consider the mood? Maybe Equamensa, you can elaborate on that bit? Hmm? No.
Okay. Well, let me just answer the way it is. Did I consider the mood? Okay, I'm sure you're not talking about mood and modality, but did you consider, you know, what do you call the mood of the interaction, of the interactants? Were they happy?
Of participants, yes. Yeah.
Yes. So were they happy? Were they sad? Were they afraid? You know, my interest was, you know, how these phonetic features correlated with interactants' actions. Um, Obviously, you know, and you find this in what they call 10 competitive interactions, you know, when the people are elated about the topic, you know, what you hear basically is the increased volume. You know, so in other words, to signal joy, you know, they will increase the volume and even increase the pitch height. And to if you take like bad news delivery and stuff like that, you know, people are normally, especially those who are what do you call it, sick. You know, I did another paper on issues of liberty, you know, and one of the things I say is that in the communities that I study, you know, people who are sick sometimes feel that their caregivers are imposing on them, you know, and so they're sad in the way they talk. So the volume is considerably low. You know, the pitch pattern again is not very high. Their utterances are not fast. You know, tempo. Oftentimes it's even rallentando. You know, it's very slow. So yes, you have that. But mood is very important. I mean, joy, sadness, being competitive. You know. These are all kind of shown in the kind of phonetic details that one finds with these interactants.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And there's another one from Abiola Kalejaye. Thanks, Prof, for this insightful, pragmatic approach to the study of prosody. I'm being inspired. I would like to ask if there is a branch of linguistics for combination. So which kind of interdisciplinary study could be done with that?
Okay. For example, I began as a phonetician. You know, my training was in phonetics, and then, you know, pragmatics became something I'm interested in. These days, I also do ethnopragmatics. You know, for people in linguistic anthropology, for example, people in politics, political science, people in law. You know, so there's considerable interdisciplinarity that can come here. what is interesting is I gave a series of lectures in Ghana not so long ago. It's called the Dankwa Memorial Lectures, in which I looked at issues of language and liberty, language and liberty in religion. What kinds of, phonetic features do we find there? Language and liberty in politics. If political actors are criticizing other political actors, okay, what phonetic features do we find associated with them? How about if they are asked a questionable question? What we know is that questionable questions tend not to be answerable. However, political actors don't have that freedom. The same way with discuss in the law, in law, when you are asked yes or no question in a legal situation, your answer is supposed to be located in the positive negative spectrum. Say that if you do not provide such an answer, what do you call you are said to be evasive, and they can pursue an answer. In politics, political actors have a very interesting way of dealing with that. They may evade the question by asking the question that was asked and give their own answer, or they may ask their own question and answer it. I don't know whether you've been paying attention to what's going on here in the U.S. And these days, especially yesterday and this morning, when political actors were asked about the gentleman who was mistakenly shipped to or flown to El Salvador, everybody, political artists are saying, well, you have to refer to the DOJ. Everybody was shifting the blame because the question was questionable. The question was questionable. And I mean, you could, if you have the time, please listen to it. When the president is asked, or when the guy made in charge of deportation, Goldman was answering questions, the volume was so low.
Someone
Hello.
has their microphone switched on. Please switch it off.
Okay, so what you have is that when political actors are asked questionable questions, in other words, questions that are difficult to answer, they may use a low volume, even when they are evading it. And in some cases, they will say, I don't intend to answer this question. And even when they're saying that, so the short answer to your question is that, there is room for, as I said at some point, a CA has become interdisciplinary, so it's not just the one that was done initially by ethnomethodologists, linguists are doing it, psychologists are doing it, and so, yeah, there's that, what do you call it, interdisciplinarity. And there's a lot of literature, which if you sent an email, I would, and my email is sobeng, SOBENG, @iu.edu, SOBENG @iu.edu. If you sent me an email, I would, give you tons of references as to how you can, find this interdisciplinary thing that's going on.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So there's another question from Nana Abia Amfo, and maybe she would like to ask herself. Nana?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you, Samuel, for your illuminating talk. You did mention that you use native speaker varieties for your data. And I was wondering why. Is it that you have no interest in various varieties of languages? And what happens when you're dealing with a language like English, where now various Englishes are recognized? Literally, there are varieties of English.
Thank you very much. Oh, are you done? I'm sorry.
Yes, I'm done.
Oh, good. Yes, if I'm dealing with English, and I don't deal very much with English, is this court thing that has English. Now, I consider English as a native language, native language for Ghanaians and for Nigerians. It's just that we speak a different dialect of it. So yes, we have the inner circle and the outer circle. So I don't speak like what you call an American, even though I've lived here for 31 years. In fact, when I came here 31 years ago, I was offered what was called accent reduction, you know, and I said I wouldn't take it. I said if I took it, it would not be me again. You know, I'll be speaking like an American, and I want to sound African. I want to sound Ghanaian. So yes, I mean, if I'm interested in those, but as I said, until recently, I dealt mainly in Akan, but I'm open even in Akan, you know. And I'm understanding your question here. How about if I find instances where, you know, there is someone who is not a native speaker but speaking, I will not discount their speech. So even though I kind of focus on native speaker statusship, you know, I'm not what do you call it? I won't say that I won't look at other varieties, you know. I do look at those too, but then I'll have to specify, you know, since I'm doing personal phonetic record, detailed phonetic representation, I have to indicate somewhere that this person is not speaking, what do you call it, the native language or the native kind that I'm dealing with. But yes, I mean, number one, I take English as a native language, Ghanaian language. In fact, even in Nigeria, where Pidgin English has been nativized, you know, I mean, it's become a Creole, you know. I remember I had what do you call it? We did field matters in linguistics, and we studied Nigerian Pidgin English, you know, and I kept telling the students, let's call it Nigerian Creole English because it's been nativized, you know, and what do you call it? I won't shun or run away from those. I'll look at them. But as I said, the central focus of my research has been on native speaker statusship.
Thank you. Are there more questions? I don't see any in the chat.
I have, I've added Samuel's email in the chat for anyone who wants to contact him, if that's okay, Samuel.
Yes, it is fine with me. And there are 31 of us on this. That's wonderful. Mm-hmm.
So everybody,
Registrants, but we figured out at the last minute what day today is. I'm sure that has caused some to drop off, but I'm try to get our timing right. I know in the US it's not a problem, but in
No,
other
here it's not a holiday now. In
Mhm.
fact, we have faculty meeting immediately after this one.
So if there are no more questions, I would like to end the lecture session here, and thank you very, very much from all our hearts for your lecture and the discussion. It was a very insightful, interesting talk. And yeah, I wish you a good afternoon. And for those who are having Easter or Pesach, I wish you good festivities.
Thank you very much. And I have to thank you for the opportunity, you know, to share some of my work. I've enjoyed interacting with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much, Samuel, and thank you everyone for attending. And we look forward to providing additional webinars in the future.
Okay.
Look out for that.
Thank you very much.
You're
Thank you so much.
welcome,
Thank you.
Ellen.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're
Melissa,
welcome.
Thank you so
Melissa,
much.
this is Catherine.
Thank
And
you.
happy Easter.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Same to you.
Thank you.
Right.
Good to see you all.
Okay.
Good to see
yeah.
you too. Thank you. All right. Well, bye-bye now. Thank you
Okay.
so much.
Bye,
Thank you.
Samuel.
Bye-bye,
Thank you
Samuel.
very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
Bye. Hi, Melissa.
Yes.
This is Catherine.
Oh, hello, Catherine. How are you? I can't see
I'm
you.
fine. Good to see you.
Likewise. Very good. Okay. Have a good Easter, everyone.
Yeah,
Thank you.
everyone, happy Easter.
Thanks for
Thank
doing
you.
this.
Thank you.
Very
Yeah,
nice. Good to see
Yeah.
you.
yes.
Ciao.
Ciao, ciao. Okay, we'll talk, Outreach Committee.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Take good care.
Okay.
So shall I
bye.
stop here?
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. I'll stop here, okay?
Yeah, okay, bye, Christian. Thanks.
Bye, Melissa.